Imagine looking at an old empty bag you were about to throw away and suddenly realizing it could become a tiny potato garden. No large backyard, no expensive equipment, just a simple bag, some soil, and the right growing method. But how does it work? You don't need a huge field, expensive equipment, or even a traditional garden bed to grow fresh potatoes. With the right bag, good quality soil, a few healthy seed potatoes, sunlight, and regular watering, a small corner of a yard, patio, balcony, or terrace can become surprisingly productive. Growing potatoes in bags is one of the simplest forms of container gardening, especially for people who have limited space. And the best part comes at harvest time. There is no need to dig deep into the ground with a shovel. You can simply empty the bag and uncover the potatoes hiding inside. So, let's start with the bag. You don't necessarily need to buy an expensive potato growing bag. A sturdy, opaque, food-safe container or suitable grow bag with good drainage can work. Fabric grow bags are particularly useful because they allow air and water to move through the sides, while other containers can also work if they have enough drainage holes. A container around 10 to 15 gallons is commonly recommended for potatoes, although the exact size can vary depending on the variety and planting method. Avoid making the container extremely tall because the upper part can dry out while the bottom remains too wet, creating conditions that encourage rot. The goal is simple: enough room for roots and developing tubers, but also excellent drainage. Now comes one of the most important decisions: the potato you plant. Instead of simply grabbing any potato from your kitchen, it is better to use certified disease-free seed potatoes from a reputable source. Grocery store potatoes may have been treated to slow sprouting, and they can also carry diseases without obvious symptoms. Seed potatoes are specifically intended for planting and usually provide a more reliable start. If a large seed potato needs to be divided, each piece should contain viable eyes, and freshly cut pieces can be allowed to dry before planting so the cut surface can form a protective layer. This small step can reduce the chance of rotting after planting. Next, prepare the growing mixture. This is where many beginners make their first mistake. Ordinary garden soil may seem like the obvious choice, but inside a container, it can become compacted and drain poorly. A lighter potting mix combined with good quality compost is generally a better option. The mixture should hold enough moisture for the plant while still allowing excess water to escape. Think of the soil as a balance. Too dry and the developing tubers struggle. Too wet and the potatoes can rot. A loose, fertile, well-drained growing medium gives the underground tubers the environment they need to develop properly. Now comes time to plant. Start by putting a layer of growing mix into the bottom of the bag, roughly several inches deep. Place the seed potatoes on top with their eyes or sprouts facing upward, leaving enough space between them so the plants are not overcrowded. Depending on the size of the container, only a few seed potatoes may be appropriate. More potatoes do not automatically mean more harvest. In fact, overcrowding can result in many small tubers because the plants compete for nutrients, water, light, and growing space. Once the seed potatoes are positioned correctly, cover them with several inches of the growing mix and give the container a thorough watering. And now we reach the technique that makes potato bags so interesting: hilling, or gradually adding more soil around the growing stems. As the potato plant grows upward, don't immediately fill the entire bag. Instead, allow the shoots to emerge and then gradually add more growing mix around the stems while keeping the leaves exposed to sunlight. This process can be repeated as the plant grows. Potato tubers develop from underground stems, so burying portions of the stem encourages additional underground growth. At the same time, keeping developing potatoes covered protects them from sunlight. This is extremely important because potatoes exposed to light can turn green and develop elevated levels of glycoalkaloids such as solanine. Sunlight is another major part of the equation. Put your potato bag in a location that receives plenty of direct sunlight. Around 6 to 8 hours a day is a useful target for container-grown potatoes. Good sunlight helps the leaves produce the energy the plant needs to grow strong stems and eventually develop tubers. But sunlight doesn't mean the soil should be allowed to bake completely dry. Container plants can dry out faster than plants growing in the ground, so check the moisture regularly. Water deeply enough to moisten the growing mix but never leave the bag sitting in stagnant water. The soil should generally remain evenly moist rather than constantly soggy. This is also where growing potatoes in bags differs from growing them directly in the ground. In a traditional garden bed, the surrounding soil provides a much larger volume of moisture and nutrients. In a bag, everything is concentrated into a small space. That means you have more control, but you also have more responsibility. You can control the soil mixture, drainage, placement, and harvest much more easily, but you need to pay closer attention to watering and nutrition. Container potatoes can be excellent for balconies, patios, small gardens, and other limited spaces, but they don't magically outperform a well-managed field. The real advantage is space efficiency, control, portability, and easy harvesting. As the plants continue growing, keep adding growing mix around the stems while leaving the leaves exposed to light. Some gardeners repeat this process every couple of weeks during active growth. If you see a developing potato exposed near the surface, cover it immediately with soil or mulch. The goal is to maintain a protective layer over the tubers while allowing the foliage to continue receiving light and air. At this stage, the plant is building the energy factory above the soil and the potato crop below it. So don't be tempted to constantly disturb the soil to check for potatoes. Let the plant do its work. Nutrition matters too. Potatoes are relatively nutrient-demanding crops, so starting with fertile growing media is important. Compost can contribute nutrients and organic matter, while a suitable fertilizer may be used according to the product's instructions and the needs of the growing medium. But more fertilizer is not always better. Excessive feeding can encourage leafy growth without necessarily producing the harvest you want. The goal is healthy, balanced growth, not simply the biggest leaves. If your potting mix and compost are already nutrient-rich, adjust additional feeding accordingly rather than automatically adding large amounts. Then comes the waiting period. Depending on the variety and growing conditions, potatoes can take roughly several weeks to a few months to mature. Small new potatoes can sometimes be harvested earlier, while potatoes intended for storage are usually allowed to mature longer. Watch the plants rather than relying on one exact calendar date. When the foliage begins to yellow, brown, and die back naturally, the plant is signaling that the growing cycle is coming to an end. For storage potatoes, allowing the crop to mature fully helps the skins become tougher and more suitable for storage. And finally, the most satisfying moment, the harvest. This is where the old bag becomes almost like a treasure chest. Instead of digging through a garden bed and accidentally cutting potatoes with a shovel, simply tip the bag onto a clean surface and gently loosen the growing mix with your hands. Suddenly, potatoes begin appearing from underneath the stems and soil. Some may be small, medium-sized, and some surprisingly large depending on the variety and growing conditions. The ease of harvest is one of the biggest reasons container-grown potatoes are so appealing. But don't rush the final step. Handle the harvested potatoes gently because cuts and bruises can create entry points for organisms that cause storage rot. Keep potatoes away from direct sunlight because light exposure can cause them to turn green. For potatoes you plan to store, use a cool, dark, well-ventilated location rather than a bright kitchen counter. Green potatoes or green portions should not be treated as normal food. Heavily green potatoes should be discarded. So what makes this method so powerful? It's not that an old bag somehow creates more potatoes in a field. The real magic is that it turns unused space into productive growing space. A small patio can become a garden. An empty corner can become a potato patch. A discarded bag can become a container. And because the entire growing environment is concentrated in one portable space, you can control the soil, drainage, sunlight, and harvesting process much more easily. For beginners, renters, balcony gardeners, and anyone working with limited space, that's a huge advantage. So before you throw away that old sturdy bag, take a second look. With proper drainage, a quality growing mix, healthy seed potatoes, enough sunlight, careful watering, gradual hilling, and a little patience, that forgotten bag can become a surprisingly productive mini potato garden. And when harvest day finally arrives, you won't need a giant field or a complicated machine. You simply open the bag, loosen the soil, and discover your potatoes one by one. Sometimes the best garden isn't the biggest garden. Sometimes it's the one you can create with the little space and simple materials you already have. Old bags, fresh soil, healthy seed potatoes, and the harvest waiting underneath. Thanks for watching.